What up, though? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Lawrence Report. And on tonight's broadcast, we'll be discussing episode 5 of BMF, The Battle for Techwood. And it was a lot of deaths in this episode. I mean, my goodness, we lost Little Kevin, Milton, Diesel, Rip, Detective Kobe, and Stacks. I hope that's everybody I can think of right now. But my God, we lost so many people, and this episode was one of the saddest episodes I've seen, period, in the history of the show of BMF. It was just, after I watched this episode, I was just thinking for like 10 minutes about all the people that passed and just how the whole drug scene back in the day, and how a lot of times as men, our egos, they get in the way. And we'll discuss what I mean by egos later in this episode. And this whole entire episode, it kind of felt like this right here. Y'all see this? Call of Duty. It was an absolute war zone. But my heart, man, my heart is broken for these kids in this on this episode. Kevin and little Milton. Kevin got caught. I blame his dad for a lot of it. I feel like he could have looked out for his son. He could have had more, better protection, better, stronger upbringing. But as I said, man, RP little Kevin. So basically, we pick off from the last episode, right? Terry is finally down there in Atlanta. And of course, when the first stop to get to is the strip club. You know about the strip clubs in Atlanta. Come on. You know it's prime time down there. So at the same time, Loco gets a chance to finally meet the meat tweet. But he's not necessarily sold on the brother, Terry, yet. But he does eventually come around, and, you know, Meech tells Loco that, listen, I basically want to set up some shop up there in St. Louis for you, Loco. I want to help you out. Like, let's get to it. So they want to do that, but they have bigger fish to fry. And we end up seeing Remy. He's in the club, right? And of course, Stacks comes along because Stacks still wants to get revenge with Remy as well. And of course, they get into this big brawl, and we end up seeing Diesel, right? Diesel's like, yo, Meech, you know how to throw a incredible homecoming party, right? Considering that, Terry and Meech, they popped off on Remy in the club, right? And Remy was gonna come out and get his revenge, and he does get his revenge, unfortunately, on one of Terry and Meech's partners, Diesel. Diesel ends up passing away due to gunfire, and that right there in itself is about to set the whole war between BMF versus Techwood. Now, Stacks comes up with this idea to take on, Remy, his crew, in his own hood, which is basically Techwood, right? And of course, like Terry says, that is the most dumbest idea that anybody could even think about. But the one thing I do love about Terry and Meech, it kind of sometimes on polar opposites, right? Sometimes they are fire and ice, right? I feel like for the most part, Meech is always all about the fire and Terry's about the ice, right? And what I mean is, sometimes Meech doesn't think twice. He just goes in guns blazing. And Terry kind of sometimes take a seat back and think about all the repercussions, right? And of course, Stacks is like, yeah, let's do that. Let's take it to their home turf and let's battle them there. Again, Stacks is going to be a snake. We've already seen this. We knew this was coming from the last episode. And then that was just a horrible idea to go to Techwood. And in fact, Terry even tells him about, a little story that he learned about in history class. And Meech is like, listen, I ain't got time to hear about this, T. Like, we got to go down there and do what we got to do. But the one thing I did like about Terry in this episode, he kind of had a feeling about Stacks, because Stacks was just too happy to go down there and to just, go out guns blazing. And also, not to mention, we talked about St. Louis, right? But again, it's bigger fish to fry. So St. Louis right now is completely out of the picture. Now I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. I'm gonna talk about Charles, right? And his whole storyline with Lucille. Now Charles, he's at this diner. He's meeting one of the ladies from the church, right? And basically Charles wrote some music with his band. He wrote a song trying to get Lucille back, hoping that this is going to sway her from the doctor, right? And at this diner, we see Estelle, right? You know, Estelle is one of Lucille's closest friends from the church, right? And Charles, one thing I did like about Charles, he did ask a female, you know, how would she feel about this right here, about this song? And I thought that was dope of him trying to reach out to another female for her take on this, right? And she's basically saying that she loves it, right? But we have Estelle in the background, and Estelle is hot. As a matter of fact, she runs off to tell Lucille that she saw Charles with another man, with another woman, right? And you know, sometimes people, we jump to conclusions. That's basically what Estelle did. And when Charles comes home, you know, Lucille got the bat out and all of that. He's like, listen, 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 listen. This was old girl from the church. I wanted her advice on it. He ends up playing her the song. Lucille falls in love with the song. And then you know what they do after that. I even got to say it. You already know what time it is. And another key player in this episode right here was Detective Brian, right? He actually gets released from jail, but he got released thanks to Henry, right? So two of Henry's people, you know, two of her men, they're on their way to pick up Brian. And while they're traveling, you know, the driver says, you know, Henry, you know, believes that you owe her, and, you know, things of that nature right there, right? And Detective Brian's like, oh yeah, is that right, huh? And there's this guy in the back seat. He has these crazy eyes. You know, this guy here is basically going to try to kill Brian because Henry's upset that everything did not go well when it came to the package being handled right, and she wants to take it all out on Brian. So Brian's like, yo, you mind if I smoke a little bit? He's like, sure. And again, the guy in the back seat's looking crazy. He ends up trying to stab Brian, and they're all fighting while they're going probably 50, 60 miles per hour in the car. And Brian basically ends up escaping from the clutches of two of Henry's men. So you already know, when Henry find out, it's going to be World War III. Now, this part absolutely broke me down. Talking about Brian and little Kevin. We got to talk about this. Brian comes in to see Kevin. Kevin is completely beat up, right? And he explains to Brian that the people who were protecting him, they basically are now violating him. I'm not going to go into what they done. You saw what happened. But it was a very, very sad situation. My heart shattered into pieces for Kevin in this episode. Because we know Kevin ends up dying in this episode, right? Those guys end up beating him up. They molest him. And Brian's hands are tied. There's nothing that he can do. You know, he even runs to Detective Jen to try to get help from her, but even she can't help him because of the current situation that, you know, little Kevin, the predicament that he is in. So for those two men, you know, they have to let Henrietta know that Brian escaped, right? And Henrietta is pissed off, and it is going to be a World War III type scenario when this happens, right? She ends up challenging one of the men to a battle, right? She says, yo, fight me. Dude is like, listen, Crazy Eyes, I'm talking about Crazy Eyes, who's in the back of the seat. Like, listen, I'm not gonna fight you. You're a woman. She's like, no, fight me. So they end up punching each other. And he's like, listen, I'm at a disadvantage. I'm kind of hurt. And she's like, you know what? I'm hurt too. So she ends up taking a knife. She ends up basically stabbing the side of herself to injure herself, which is crazy. This girl, Henrietta, is different out here. And her and this guy, Crazy Eyes, they end up going at it. She ends up beating him. And she ends up killing him as well because she is so hot that Brian got off. In fact, you know, she even tells the people that, you know, take off the child protection services when it comes to little Kevin in the jail. Like the guys who was watching over little Kevin, they ain't got to watch him no more because what they about to do to little Kevin is about to be a horrific violation. The one thing that I did love about Meechin's episode, and we saw this in the previous episode as well, how, you know, the character Rip, right? He is basically on this musical journey, right? He wants to make it big in the music, right? And at the same time, Meechin's like, listen, you ain't got to be a part of, you know, what we're doing. You still can ride with us. We want you to continue to do your music. I'm going to make sure the whole world hears your music, right? And Terry, you know, he's there back at the home with Meech and Duffy, right? And Terry's kind of suspicious of Stax, right? But Meech claims that he's 2 steps ahead of everybody and that everybody just deserves a second chance. Everybody just deserves grace, right? But again, I like how they kind of felt like this episode kind of felt like it was a B Mickey type situation, right? You know how in the previous season how B Mickey was switching sides, and ultimately that's exactly what Stacks was doing. So while the crew, they're at this house, they come up with this plan to basically have a truce with Remy, right? And one by one, each member of BMF, they all say they're down to ride, including Rip. And if you've seen these type shows before, you know something's gonna happen. And you know, as the crew is on their way to Techwood, it's not gonna be a great outcome for Rip. But again, they decided to try to make a truce with Remy on his turf, which turns out to be a bad idea. And one thing that I should also mention, we do end up seeing Detective Jen and Detective Kobe, right? Um, Detective Jen can no longer hide the information that she knows on Brian, right? So eventually she does end up coming clean to Detective Kobe. And for some reason, I kind of thought those two was going to develop a relationship, more like a loving, type relationship between each other, right? Like two people who could easily fall in love, right? But unfortunately, we may not get a chance to see that because they have the whole karaoke scene and they're vibing, right? And Brian ends up coming over to Detective Chen's house, right? But Henry basically follows Detective Brian. And when she does that, she's spraying these bullets inside of, I forgot who apartment it was, but we do end up seeing Kobe getting struck and she's bleeding out. So we may not see that, and that was another emotional scene. I hate that for Detective Kobe because she didn't deserve to be caught in this crossfire. So now we get down to the big battle at Techwood, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but this young woman right here, she does end up getting intel, end up getting the inside scoop that Stacks is basically going to ambush, along with Glock. They're going to ambush both Remy and BMF, right? So shout out to her, for her information, for the leak, for the big showdown. And again, they are on the Techwood home turf. They have all these people looking out. They're making phone calls and people going inside picking up their babies because they know that this thing right here is about to be a major battle. And, Meech and his crew, the BMF crew, they come up to Remy and them and they try to squash it out, right? Meech tries to squash it. He's up letting him know that, listen, Glock and them, they trying to kill both of us. So let's figure out a way. How can we squash this right here before everybody get popped? And Remy's like, how can I trust you, right? And unfortunately, Remy pulls out his guns, and at the same time, Meech pulls out his guns, and before we know it, Stacks is already there with Glock, and the whole neighborhood is set on fire from a blaze of bullets and death and bodies laying on the ground everywhere. We saw Rip get popped in this one right here. He got killed. I hate that for him because he wanted to do his music, but he's also trying to be down with the team. RP Rip, he ended up passing away. And we saw that little boy, I can't think of his name right now. He ended up coming up with a Glock out of nowhere, right? I'm like, yo, what is he doing with a Glock? Because again, this little boy looked up to Remy because Remy was supposed to be the neighborhood, Robin, Batman, whatever you want to call him. He ends up getting popped himself. And his dad comes looking for him. And he see his son on the ground. And Remy's there too. And it is that whole battle, so much. Oh my God, so much just could have just got squashed between everybody. And when the battle was finally over, right, when all the gunfire finally stopped, Stacks is like, man, we could have did this, we could have did this. Glock ain't trying to hear it because, reinforcements basically came out to help out BMF, right? And like I said, Glock ain't trying to hear it. So Glock ends up popping 2 Chainz's character Stacks. So now Stacks is dead. as well, for being an informant, for trying to play both sides. And when we get down to the end of this episode, we end up seeing Meech and Terry. They're back at the house, and Terry's like, "Yo, so you ready to roll? You ready to go back to Detroit?" And Meech is like, "Listen, I'm not going back. With this right here, I created my own community down here. This is my new family. So you can head back to Detroit. Atlanta is going to be my home for the foreseeable future." So we see Terry and Meech, they kind of both go their separate ways. They both are fighting these wars, in their own right. And of course, I already knew that Meech wasn't going to go back to Detroit. He had a strong foundation with Duffy, Angel, and everybody else that surrounded him down there in Atlanta. So we will see, how them two will continue to operate, with one being in Detroit and one being in Atlanta. This right here may have been the top out of all the episodes of BMF. This right here just may be top 3, if not top 5 greatest of BMF. I love the scene. I love that ending, basically. Meech and them, they both going separate ways, but I also love how Charles, he's trying to get his woman back. He's doing everything he can. But at the same time, I hated all the casualties that passed in this episode. So many bodies, right? But we will see. We got, I think, 5 more episodes left. So we'll have a funeral scene on the next episode. So we will see. As always, thanks for tuning in to The Lawrence Report.